Okay, so today I wanted to film a declutter video. I know declutter videos are not quite as popular these days, but honestly, it's something that I'm going to do behind the scenes, so I figure I might as well film it for those of you that enjoy watching them. I like declutter videos not because I'm like looking for people to get rid of a ton of makeup, but I feel like in declutter videos, you get a ton of reviews, and that's what I try to do. I swatch everything, I compare formulas, and I talk about every single product I've tried and every single product I own. So that way, if you're looking for like a lot of reviews in one place, hopefully this video is helpful for you. I haven't actually purchased a ton of new bronzers or highlighters over the past year, so I don't know that my collection is a lot bigger than it was at this time last year when I decluttered, or maybe like a year and a half ago because it's been a little while. But even still, I like to go through pretty much every section of my makeup collection at least once a year and do like an overall declutter to either remove formulas I no longer love, shades that I've just kind of discovered don't work for me right now, or formulas that are older or expired. There shouldn't be too many of those, but it does happen. Makeup expires, so I just like to take a look. I pass used products along to friends and family. If they're very lightly used, I can send them to something like Project Beauty Share. And if you like declutter videos, I do these like once a month. I have a playlist on my channel, so I'll link below. So let's start with bronzers. Okay, the first bronzer in here is the NYX Buttermelt Bronzer. Such a gorgeous formula. This came out a little bit earlier this year along with the Buttermelt blushes, and I absolutely love them. So I have the shade All Butted Up, which is described as a light medium neutral. I actually had two shades, and I'm not sure what happened to the other one. We were traveling, so I think maybe I accidentally left it behind. But this is such a smooth, very easy to work with formula. This is very, very pigmented. So I will say if you tend to prefer something a little bit softer on the skin, this might not be the most ideal option. It does blend out very easily. So you can, even if you apply a little bit too much, I feel like if you just really blend it, it does kind of melt into the skin in the most perfect way. Okay, here's what the swatch looks like. I hope my lighting is okay. It looks a little bit bright, so if it is, I'll try to tone it down in editing. But I do have lights set up in a certain way so you can see the texture of the products when I do these videos. It does have a glowy finish, but on the skin, I feel like it's very flattering. Like it doesn't look highlightery. To me, it just has like a nice soft satin look to it that's very beautiful. So if you like the idea of a glowy bronzer without it being full on shimmery or glittery, I do think this is a really great option. Let me try to find a few other glowy bronzers, glowy powder bronzers, so I can show you some comparison swatches. So this one is the Essence Kissed by the Light. It's technically described as an illuminating powder, so I mean, I don't know if everyone would really pick this up as a bronzer or more of a highlighter. The lighter part is like, it looks like an actual highlighter on the skin, and then the darker parts are more of like a matte bronzer. But when I wear this on the skin, I kind of mix it together, and I more so use it as like a very glowy bronzer. They have another one of these, which I actually keep with my blushes because it does lean more pink toned. So I kind of use that in the place of like a highlighter bronzer all in one. But this is a really nice powder too. So I just want to compare a couple of the glowier products I have in case you are looking for a glowy option. This one is in the shade Sun Kissed. So this is the NYX one, and then this is the Essence one. I turned my light a little bit because I feel like it was washing it out. So I like them both. They're great options. I think the NYX formula definitely feels a little bit smoother on the skin compared to Essence, but Essence is maybe not quite as pigmented. So if I want something a little softer, I'll use that product. I would say the other glowy bronzers I have in my collection are maybe from Flower Beauty. So this is their Heatwave Luminous Bronzer. I actually have two of them. So I have Sunrise, which is my favorite out of the two. I ended up purchasing the other shade as well. I think I've had it and then I've decluttered it a few times over the years. Sunrise is really beautiful. So in the pan, it looks a little bit cooler, but on the skin, it actually has a little bit of a red tone to it. And this has a kind of like glowy powder mixed in. So it does give your skin a little bit of a glow, but I feel like out of the three products, this one looks the least glowy, like the most natural in terms of glow. So there's Flower Beauty Sunrise. It's such a pretty shade. If you feel like a lot of bronzers pull too orangey on you, this is a great option just because it has kind of like that red tone to it, a little bit of like a rosy vibe, so it looks gorgeous on the skin. I did end up buying the Flower Beauty bronzer in the shade Sunswept. So this one obviously looks more kind of orangey in the pan. It's slightly warmer. Here's what they look like next to each other. I do wear Heatwave more often, but I wanted to repurchase this one because there are days where I like something just slightly warmer. I don't reach for this one quite as much. as Sunrise, just because I love the way Sunrise looks on the skin. But this one's a little bit lighter, so I feel like when I just want something slightly more natural, this is perfect. So here's what the lighter bronzer looks like. So just kind of a couple of glowy options in my collection. I mean, compared to all of these, I do think the NYX bronzer does end up looking a little bit glowier than I originally thought. But again, on the skin, I don't get that. It just ends up looking kind of like a soft satin. So I am going to keep those four, but I think I'm going to get rid of a few other bronzers that I feel like I would have used for a similar purpose in the past, including my Milani Baked Bronzer. I really loved this for such a long time, but number one, mine is getting pretty old. I don't know that it's expired, but I feel like it doesn't perform as well as it used to. So to me, that is a sign that it usually has expired. Baked products don't typically expire super quickly, but I don't even know how long I've had this, so that could definitely be the case. Or I just might have found other formulas I like a little bit better. Honestly, it just feels pretty dry, so I am assuming that this one is just getting a little bit too old. Also, I don't find this shade quite as flattering on my skin as I used to. It's a little bit orangey and sometimes it's slightly too soft. So I actually am going to declutter the Milani one, but I used to love that formula. I kind of think if I did repurchase it, I would probably like it. I've heard a lot of people talking about the Milani Silky Matte Bronzer recently, and I didn't like that when I tried it for the first time, but I feel like my preferences have changed a little bit, so I kind of wonder if I would like it if I were to try it now. This is from Covergirl. I surprisingly liked this more than I thought I would. It's their Clean Fresh Radiant Loose Powder Bronzer, and I have the shade Sunkissed. I didn't actually have high hopes for this because I bought their loose setting powder that comes, I forgot, you have to actually just pull this lid off. It comes in like the exact same packaging. It's a very messy product. So to me, that's kind of a big con. I ended up just taking off like part of the sticker because when I had the setting powder, I took the full sticker off and it just made such a mess. But I will say I was kind of intimidated by a loose bronzer. It actually looks really pretty on the skin. It's a little bit softer than I anticipated because it does look pretty dark in the packaging. But if you just go in with a very large fluffy brush, it gives your skin the most natural touch of bronze. I mean, if your skin is much darker than mine, I don't really know that it would show up very well. Like even as I swatch it, you can't really see it on my hand that well, but on the skin, it looks pretty and again, very, very natural. So if you're the type of person that doesn't like the look of bronzer, but you want like a little bit of that warmth, you might actually like this or another loose bronzer. Honestly, I don't know a lot of brands that make loose bronzers just off the top of my head. Maybe Bare Minerals, but it was kind of nice that this was a good drugstore option. So nothing against the formula, I just don't wear it very much. Any other glowy powder bronzers? I don't think so. I think the rest of my powder bronzers are matte bronzers. So let's finish up with powder bronzers and then we'll move on to creams. I think I'm actually going to declutter this one as well. I really liked this. It's the Rimmel London Natural Bronzer. It's supposed to be a waterproof formula. I have the shade Sunlight. I actually want to try more from Rimmel London. They are cruelty-free, and even back in the day when I was first getting into drugstore makeup, for some reason, I just never tried much from the brand. So if you guys have any Rimmel London recommendations, please let me know. So I did use this for a while. There was like a cute little sun design. The thing about this one is, again, I feel like the shade is just a little bit off for me. Like it's very light, it's a little bit orangey, and I wear more orangey bronzers from time to time, but overall, I do prefer something a little bit rosier when it comes to a powder bronzer. So now that I have like the NYX formula, I have the Flower Beauty formula, I feel like a lot of the bronzers I used to love that have more of this orange tone just don't get used as often in my collection. So I am going to declutter that one as well. This is from NYX. It is their matte bronzer in the shade Light. So I used to have the shade Medium, which was too dark for me, so I purchased Light. This actually matches a lot better. Again, I wouldn't say that I have any like big complaints about this formula. It works fairly well. It's like a good matte bronzer, but I really like there is one main matte bronzer that I end up reaching for the most part. And because of that, I don't wear this one quite as often. Again, it just has like I'm so picky about powder bronzers. It's almost a little bit too orangey. And this one is less orangey than a few other options I've tried. But I don't know, I feel like bronzer is almost like foundation in that you have to find your exact right shade. Otherwise, I can't get the lighting right in this video. I'm sorry, I keep moving my lights. Otherwise, it looks a little bit off. And I feel like that's the case with this one. A really good formula though, I haven't really used it a ton, so I'm going to see if one of my sisters or my mom wants this. Okay, so a few powder bronzers I really like. This is my absolute favorite formula and shade. It is the e.l.f. Primer Infused Bronzer, and I have the shade Tan O'Clock. This is absolutely perfect. I feel like it is such a good neutral toned bronzer. Like, it's not too warm. I wouldn't call it a cool toned product by any means, but it's just neutral. I feel like these powder bronzers don't swatch that well, so I don't know if it's coming off as great on camera, but you can definitely see the difference in the tones. This tone just isn't as orangey, and it's a very smooth formula that looks amazing on the skin. Like, never once have I applied this to my skin and then thought like, oh, my bronzer looks patchy, but that happens to me with so many bronzer formulas. So if you're looking for a very smooth, creamy, matte powder bronzer formula, definitely try e.l.f. They're like $6 or $7. They have, I think, 6 or 7 shades to choose from now. Another powder bronzer I've been using a lot is this one from Makeup by Mario. This is the SoftSculpt bronzer, and I have the shade Light. So I actually bought this last year around Black Friday, I think from the Makeup by Mario website, because they were having a pretty good sale. And at first I didn't love the formula. I thought it was okay, but I've actually been using it a lot over the last few months. Again, the tone is just perfect. And I feel like for me, not that that's more important than the actual formula, but if the tone is off, I just probably won't reach for it no matter how good the formula is. Again, this product doesn't swatch well. Like, it's hard to tell with bronzers and swatches, at least powder bronzers, but I guess you can at least see the tone. It's not quite as pigmented as e.l.f., I will say. So if you want something a little bit more subtle, Makeup by Mario's formula might be the one to try. But if you want something a little bit more pigmented, go with e.l.f. Actually, I forgot about this high-end bronzer. It's the NYX Beauty No Limits Matte Bronzer, and I have the shade Motivate, which is described as light. This is probably, well, it's definitely darker than Makeup by Mario, so I feel like I don't wear this one quite as often because, again, when it comes to bronzer, especially powder bronzer, I tend to prefer something just like a little bit lighter and softer, but this is also a really good formula. Very rich, very pigmented on the skin, but again, blends out easily. And I feel like the tone is really great too. So there's the NYX Beauty Bronzer in the shade Motivate. Even though that is a matte bronzer, as you can see, I wouldn't say it has a sheen to it, but it looks very skin-like, very smooth. So that's a great option that I love from Sephora too. This is also available at Sephora, but I think I'm actually going to declutter this. So I picked up a few products from Give by Gwen Stefani, again, Black Friday of last year, and I didn't fall in love with a ton of them. This is a bronzer duo. It's the Pick It Up Cream Contour and Powder Bronzer Duo, and I have Toast in. So with this duo, you get a cream on top and a powder on the bottom. Honestly, I feel like it's fine. It's just not something I love. So when I do, I guess that's why I haven't decluttered it yet, but when I go through and declutter my full collection, if they're products I feel like on the fence about, I honestly try to declutter them and pass them along because they're probably not getting used as often as they should in my collection. The packaging is nice. I will say I don't love the fact that the cream and the powder aren't separated like they are with like the Patrick Ta duos, but it's not the end of the world. I also feel like the pans are a little bit smaller, so when I am like dipping my brush into either the cream or the powder, like sometimes I can have a tendency to accidentally mix them together. So that's the shade, the cream on the left, the powder on the right. They're pretty pigmented, which honestly is nice. I feel like you don't have to dip back in multiple times, but just not my personal favorite formula overall, so it's time to declutter this one. Okay, so let's talk about cream formulas. My number one cream bronzer from the drugstore is Makeup Revolution's. This is not going to be pretty because I use it super often, and that's the only thing about cream bronzers. Like, they don't look good after you've used them for a little while, but I use this a lot. This is the Ultra Cream Bronzer in the shade Light. I've actually used, I don't know if I've used 2 of these up fully. I've at least used 1 of them up fully, which for me is a lot. Like, before that, I really never used up a cream bronzer, and this formula is so gorgeous. It's very rich, very pigmented. It blends out in seconds. It's affordable. Like, I don't know that I will ever not have this in my collection unless it gets discontinued, which hopefully it won't anytime soon because I do love it. Another great cream bronzer from the drugstore is this one from Milani. It's their Cheek Kiss Cream Bronzer in the shade, well, I have the shade Hey Honey. I like Makeup Revolution a little bit better. I find that that one is slightly creamier. If you tried that and you're like, no, that one is too creamy for me, it looks a little bit too dewy on the skin, you might actually prefer the Milani one. The Milani one has like a silkier texture. You'll be able to see the difference in the finishes right here. On the left is Makeup Revolution. It is much glowier, whereas this one, like next to Makeup Revolution, it almost looks matte. So I feel like on the skin, it definitely ends up looking a little bit more natural because it's not quite as glowy. I always set my cream products into place, so on my skin, it doesn't end up looking like that. But if you aren't like a big fan of setting powder, you might prefer Milani because it almost, I wouldn't call it like a self-setting formula, but it almost kind of looks and feels like that. This is the Tower 28 Sculptino in the shade Getty. It's basically their cream. They, again, kind of market it as like a cream bronzer, cream contour all in one. Here's what it looks like swatched. I feel like it's less glowy than Makeup Revolution, but more glowy than Milani. This is a good formula. It stays in place well. I think it's pretty on the skin. I like the tone of it. I don't reach for it very much, if I'm just being honest, because I do use Milani and Makeup Revolution a little bit more than this one. So I don't know. Part of me is like, just hang on to it because it's a perfectly good bronzer. But if I have other cream bronzers I like a little bit more, I probably don't need to keep it. This tone is not much different than the Milani one. So because of that, I feel like I could pass it along. This is from Makeup by Mario. It's the SoftSculpt Transforming Skin Enhancer in Light Medium. So many people love this product. I actually like the blush version of this product better than the bronzer, and I don't know what it is. I feel like whenever I swatch this or like I use it, I feel like in my mind it should be a go-to product for me. Here's what it looks like swatched next to the other shades. It's much lighter, much softer, and maybe that's the issue. I don't tend to love super sheer bronzers. Like, I like my bronzer to have a little bit of pigment because then it almost provides a little bit of coverage in what I consider to kind of be a trouble area for me because I have a lot of scarring around my cheeks. So sometimes when I use like a sheer contour or even like a liquid bronzer, I haven't really gotten into those, they almost sheer out a little bit too much for me. And I feel like that's the issue with the Makeup by Mario bronzer. I don't have a thing against sheer blushes, so maybe that's why I love the blushes so much. But every time I use this, I always end up going over it with another cream bronzer, which I want to love it because it is a really beautiful formula. I love the blushes. It sounds like something I would love, but I just don't. You can't really like force yourself to love something you don't. So I think it is time to part with this product. I almost think my mom would like this because she tends to go for more of like a natural makeup look. Definitely a really good formula though, just something that didn't work for me personally. Okay, let's talk about some bronzer sticks. That is a category that I've gotten into a little bit more. So my favorites are, I have two. This one is from Makeup by Mario. It is the SoftSculpt Shaping Stick. I have the shade Light. Oh my gosh, what happened to mine? I must have put the cap on before I fully rolled it down. I just used this the other day. But you know what? Look how much I have left. I think when I did my declutter video last year, I told you I had so much product left, but I've used it a ton over the past year. It's still usable. I'll just kind of smooth it out. I'm honestly surprised I did that. I'm usually pretty careful with my makeup products. So I like this formula because it is very long lasting. It's not quite as creamy as the next one I'm going to show you, which I love that one because it is so silky, so smooth. But this one will not move all day. Like if I'm wearing my makeup for like 12 hours, I will reach for this because I know that it won't move. So I am going to hang on to that. My other favorite is the NYX Beauty, I always forget the official name. I think it's their No Limits Cream Bronzer, Cream Contour. I actually have two different shades, so I'll swatch them both for you. I have Motivate, which is slightly darker, and then the lighter one, which they came out with afterwards, is Hope. I just forgot. Okay, Hope is this one, and then Motivate is this one. So you can tell, like the one on the left is slightly more neutral in tone. The one on the right is slightly warmer, but they're really not that different. I wear the shade Hope, which is the one in the center, more because I like the undertone just a little bit better, but I'm actually going to keep both of them because I feel like they really do both work for me. If I used them up fully, I would repurchase the center shade, but again, not significantly different, just a little bit. Honestly, I like the NYX Beauty formula a little bit better for day-to-day because it is slightly creamier, whereas Makeup by Mario it's like a little bit more on the stiff side. So it just takes like an extra few seconds to blend out. But I do think the Makeup by Mario one is longer lasting and it's not quite as glowy on the skin. So both of them are great, but just depending on what you go for, you might like one over the other. This is from Merit. This is actually the most ideal option if you like a very natural bronzer. They actually describe it as a bronzer balm. I have the shade Sen. Again, I'm not typically a fan of sheer bronzers, but this one is different. It is so gorgeous on the skin, and even though it doesn't have a lot of pigment on it, like you can still see my freckles through it. I do like this because it's very easy, like it melts into the skin in a very natural way. So on days where I am wearing like a very light natural look, sometimes it does look a little bit off if I have a ton of bronzer on, and that's when I reach for this one. I actually haven't used this one in a little while. It's the Persona Bronze Multi-Stick in the shade Dune. This is a really pretty formula too. It's not quite as rich as LYS or Makeup by Mario and not as sheer as Merit. So I feel like if you're looking for something kind of in the middle, this one could be a great option. I think I am going to part with this one. Nothing against the formula at all. I absolutely love Persona, but I've already kept 3 other formulas and I feel like that's enough. Like a sheer formula and then 2 like slightly richer, more pigmented formulas. So I'm going to pass this one along. And then I do have the Milk Makeup Bronzer Stick. I honestly, out of all of the formulas, this is probably my least favorite. It's not a bad bronzer by any means. I have the shade Baked. It just, to me, it's fine. Like I don't really talk about it in a lot of videos because I don't feel like there's anything to rave about. It feels a little dry when you apply it to the skin, which I personally don't love. I like something that's slightly creamier that really glides on, but I think again, this one does last a little bit longer. I would probably compare it, I would say it's the most similar to Makeup by Mario. So there's what it looks like swatched. The reason I'm going to keep it is because it's really great for traveling. It's so tiny, which I know like is a downside if you're purchasing the product. I forget, like there was a little drama surrounding Milk Makeup and like their shrinkflation because they really shrunk the size of their products, but they charged the same price. The Milk Makeup comes with 0.19 ounces. The Merit Beauty one, no, the Merit Beauty one comes with 0.44. Makeup by Mario, 0.37. And then LYS Beauty 0.25. So it is the least amount of product out of the 3. I'm not sure where it stands price point wise. It's probably slightly more expensive than LYS Beauty. But for me, I like this for traveling because I do tend to overpack my makeup bag. So this is perfect if I want to bring a cream bronzer. Like you wouldn't think it would make that much of a difference, but look how much smaller it is. So if I'm trying to fit everything in like a small makeup bag, I always throw that in. So I think I'm going to declutter both of these bronzer sticks. This one is from Catrice. It's the Magic Shaper Contour and Glow Stick. And then this one is from NYX. It's the Wonder Stick. So these are dual-ended sticks. They have bronzers on one side and then highlighters on the other. I actually really like both of these formulas. I think they're great. It's just the stick is a little bit too tiny. I don't like drawing on my skin with a stick this small because I feel like I have to really like go back and forth and draw quite a bit. It's nice if you're using the stick strictly for contour. And, same with the highlighter. I don't really wear the highlighters on either side of these very much, but overall, if I'm using a stick bronzer, I just like something a little bit thicker. So that totally comes down to personal preference. Maybe you don't care, or maybe you actually want like a super small stick to contour like your nose or I don't know, whatever you want to contour. Maybe those are a little bit too big. These could be great. I just feel like when I'm applying it to my face, like I have to go over it like that to cover the area I want it to. So a really, really good formula. If they sold these as like full on, okay, my highlighter just broke. But if they oh my gosh, what am I trying to say? If they sold these in like the same packaging as the other bronzer sticks, I would totally buy them. So the NYX one is in Universal Light. That's what it looks like. Like such a good bronzer formula. That's why I've held on to it, but I just don't need it when I have other bronzer sticks. And then the Catrice one is in Light. Again, really, really beautiful, very smooth and creamy. And like even swatching them, I'm tempted to keep them, but just because of like the way they're packaged and shaped, I won't reach for them as often. These 3 bronzers are from e.l.f. I am going to keep all 3 of them. So I have 2 Luminous Putty Bronzers and then 1 Matte Putty Bronzer. I like the Luminous formula a little bit better, but there are occasions where I'll reach for the matte. So these again are slightly more sheer than some of the other cream bronzers I have. Today, on the day I'm filming this, they just announced their liquid camo bronzers or contours. So I'm definitely curious to try those out. I know they also have the contour wands. So overall, I don't think their putty line is quite as popular. Hopefully they won't end up discontinuing it anytime soon because I do really like the putty line. So this is the Luminous Putty Bronzer in Summer Fridays, and then this one is in Vacay Mood. If you want like a slightly cooler tone, I would go with Vacay Mood. That's the one that I wear the most. On days where I do want like a slightly more warmth, I'll end up reaching for this one. But you know what? I think I can declutter the matte one now that I'm looking at it. This one's in the shade Tan Lines. It feels like it dried out a little bit, and I just like this one slightly more. I feel like the Luminous formula, not only is it like slightly glowy on the skin, which I think is really flattering, it feels a little bit creamier than the original formula. And again, part of that could be that I've had my original putty bronzer for a really long time, so it might just be drying out at this point, but I don't know that I need to keep both the luminous version and the matte version, so I'm going to keep the warm and the cooler luminous putty bronzers and then declutter the matte one. As far as liquids go, I thought I maybe even had just like 1 or 2 more liquids, but I guess I don't. So I have the Milani Liquid Contour in the shade Honey, and then the Flower Beauty Low Light Liquid Contour in the shade Light. I think these are both great. I like the Flower Beauty packaging a little bit better, just because Milani's packaging, like they have a super tiny applicator, which, I mean, it's not really that big of a deal in the end because I just kind of dot it on my skin and then blend it out. If I'm being really nitpicky, that's something I like better. And also the cap gets so messy, like there's just no way to hide it. I feel like that's probably what happens with my Flower Beauty one too. Yeah, it is. But the cap itself isn't translucent, so you can't really see. Anyway, I think the Milani formula is better than Flower Beauty, but I like the Flower Beauty color better. So that's why I'm going to keep both of them. On the left is Milani. I think overall that one looks smoother on the skin. It has more pigment to it, so as you blend it out, it really doesn't end up looking patchy. It looks very even. On the right is Flower Beauty. I like that it's slightly cooler. Flower Beauty's feels kind of, I guess, just thinner. I've heard some people say Flower Beauty's ends up looking streaky on their skin. It dries down super fast, like it's already dry and I just applied it, whereas the Milani one hasn't fully dried. So if you work quickly, you won't have any issues with Flower Beauty looking streaky. I mean, I guess I can't say that for sure. When I work quickly, I don't have any issues with it looking streaky on my skin, but if I like apply it and then take my time blending it out, it can look streaky in that way. But those are probably my 2 favorite liquid contours, liquid bronzers. I did try the Say one this year, which I guess technically I could say I'm decluttering that one. I have like this year I introduced a new spot in my makeup collection for makeup products that didn't work for me that I still like to keep on hand to compare to other formulas just for like content purposes, my own reference. So they're not a part of like my active makeup collection, which is why that's not in here. It's just something I keep on hand in case I need to reference it later. The last product in here is a bronzing drop, which I think I actually had the e.l.f. bronzing drops in my primers video maybe, but since it's in here, we'll talk about it. It's the Conceal and Perfect Sun-Kissed Liquid Bronzing Drops from Milani. I have the shade Light. So I've tried a couple of different bronzing drops over the years. Milani and e.l.f. are probably my 2 favorite formulas. They're definitely different. And I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's the e.l.f. formula has more pigment to it, whereas Milani's is a little bit more natural. So I feel like the Milani formula is great if you want to apply it on its own. And if you're looking for a bronzing drop to kind of mix in with your foundation or your primer or your moisturizer, e.l.f.'s is great because it is so rich and pigmented. So I feel like it almost performs slightly better if you mix it with something. Milani's formula is very silky, very glowy, really gorgeous. So I think it's a great option. I mean, I know there are higher end bronzing drops out there, but I feel like e.l.f. and Milani did a great job. So that's the end of my bronzer declutter. You couldn't see all of my bronzers, so I just moved them. But realistically, I'm really happy with this because I think I'll actually be able to fit pretty much all of my bronzers in one section now, which is nice. It is my goal, I mean, obviously to kind of keep things a little bit more curated, but I love when I can actually like cut down on the amount of space things are taking up. So here's what my bronzer collection looked like before. I started off with 30 different bronzers. Here's what it looks like afterwards. So I ended up decluttering 11 and keeping 19. So on the left are all of the ones I kept, and then here are the ones I decided to declutter. So I ended up decluttering 37%, which I think is great. I'm really happy with that. So that is it. That's the end of my video. I'm really happy with the way my bronzer collection is looking. I'm definitely content with the formulas I have. Overall, I don't really anticipate there being a ton of new bronzer launches in 2025. I think we will end up seeing some additional liquid bronzers, especially from the drugstore, because a lot of high-end brands ended up doing them in 2024. But a lot of drugstore brands actually already have their version of a liquid bronzer. I definitely plan on trying the new e.l.f. formula, so I'll definitely do a review on that. But otherwise, I don't really anticipate buying a whole lot of bronzers as we head into the new year. So I'm definitely happy with my smaller collection. Stay tuned. I will upload my highlighter declutter video next.